On a very crucial day where the negotiations are taking place between Russia and Ukraine, we are joined by a very special guest, Team Zelenskyy's Igor Zhukov, who's the deputy head in President Zelenskyy's office. He also heads the foreign policy division. Mr. Zhukov, thank you very much for speaking to India's largest news network, who's been camping here in Ukraine over the last 20 days. We have been documenting the kind of atrocities that have been committed on the ground. Mr. Zhukov, thank you very much. Let me straight away begin by asking you, we are talking on a day when the fourth round of talks are going to take place between your country and Russia. What are we really looking at? What is it that you are going to put on the negotiating table?
Thank you for having me. As we speak, the fourth round of Russian-Ukrainian negotiations on the level of delegation is taking place. What do we have on the table? First of all, we are ready for the diplomatic solution. That's what my president keeps telling about from the practically first day of war of Russia against Ukraine. Ukrainian demands on the negotiations are as follows. So first of all, definitely immediate ceasefire regime over all territory of Ukraine. This is very important, and this is the raison sine qua non. So we will not start the real negotiations without a real ceasefire in Ukraine. Secondly, we need the withdrawal of Russian troops from territory of Ukraine. This is very important condition for them not to stay on the territory of Ukraine, for them not to capture the cities that they are now capturing, some smaller cities in southern, eastern Ukraine and in north Ukraine. Thirdly, we need a strict security guarantees for Ukraine in order such terrible war not happen against my country in future. That's why when we are talking about negotiation table, it's not only two presidents should be sitting there, also the representatives of the world community should be present, our immediate neighbors, as well as the bigger international partners, states, to sit together and to talk and to negotiate and to sign possible new security guarantees for Ukraine and possible new security system in Europe.
Mr. Zhukov, I would like to draw your attention to a comment that basically came in from the Russian negotiating team, Leonid Slutsky, who says that they believe that there has been a significant progress between the talks that have taken place between Moscow and Kiev, and there could be, very soon, an agreement could be signed. Could you elaborate a little bit? What is this progress that are we really talking about? We've also heard the advisor to the Ukrainian president, Mr. Polodyatsky, who's also spoken about a significant progress that has been made. What are we to understand about this significant progress?
Well, I can share the evaluation about the progress. Maybe significant would be a little bit too strong a word. But yes, comparing to the situation when the negotiations were starting several weeks ago, and practically absence of constructive position from the Russian side, when they only talked about by ultimatum and red lines. So today the position has changed in a constructive manner. So they are really talking to Ukrainian delegation in a much more constructive manner. Yes, the conditions and the positions of two delegations are now at least exchanged and discussed. And right you are, as a result of these negotiations, and obviously those negotiations will end by the negotiations on the highest level by two presidents. But as a result, there has to be an agreement or a complex of agreements in order to bring peace to my country and bring new security guarantees to my country. Not the kind of security guarantees we used to have from 1994, when we were deprived of the third largest nuclear potential in the world, but instead of this, just received a piece of paper called Budapest Memorandum. And when Russia attacked Ukraine in 2014, this memorandum has never worked. The same as they started the war, the open war in 2022, those memorandum was absolutely non-instrumental. So we do not want assurances. We need a strict, severe, hard security guarantees for my country and for the rest of the European continent.
Mr. Zofka, I want to understand, when you say strict security guarantees, what does it really entail? Because many would say that there is some amount of ambiguity. We have seen the talk between your foreign minister and Russian foreign minister leading to some sort of a disaster. No progress was made. So what is it that, in terms of strict security guarantees, that you are demanding? What is it that you are exactly demanding at this stage?
Well, first of all, we shouldn't say something clear now as the negotiations are continue. But I mean, I will give you a very simple example. Ukraine does not belong to any military bloc for the time being, but we need a security guarantee, a very strict security guarantee for my country, for how Ukraine should be a country which will not be attacked by any aggressor. So, being a non-military or or a neutral state, we need a bilateral or multilateral security guarantees that Ukraine will never be invaded. We need to understand how our armed forces would operate without having enough potential. So it's still under negotiations, and definitely I will not reveal here all the peculiarities of the negotiations. But again, the results should be very strong, and my country should never experience foreign aggression in future.
Mrs. Zofka, I would like to draw your attention now to the other very crucial statement that has been made by your president, and I would like to quote your president. And this is what he says: "Our mission is clear, to do everything we can to ensure a meeting of the two presidents, the meeting that I'm sure people are waiting for." My question to you is that, does this mean that you are willing to declare a neutral status vis-a-vis NATO? That is Ukraine today in a position that you will not want to be aligned with any particular bloc? Is that at least on the cards, that you are at least contemplating at this point in time?
Well, Ukraine expressed its desire several times and throughout the last decades to be a part of NATO. Unfortunately, for the time being, this is not the case from NATO allies. They are not ready to accept Ukraine, neither today nor in the foreseeable future. In this case, if a potential neutral status or a non-bloc status for some period of time will bring peace to my country, yes, this is negotiable. But once again, you have to understand that simple declaring the neutral status or non-bloc status brings nothing to Ukraine. We're in the middle of Europe. We're in the middle of European continent. We will be neighboring Russia forever because this is our neighbor. So instead of having the membership in this or that bloc, we need to have these guarantees which I'm talking about. Ukraine should be defended. Yes, we can defend it by ourselves. That's what we are showing now. We are fighting not only for Ukraine today, we are fighting for every European Union member, because it will not stop aggressor here in my country. Russia will further go to Lithuania or to Poland or to France and Germany. And everyone should understand this. We are ready to stop the aggressor in Ukraine. On the contrary, instead of this, we need the support of all our European partners and friends, and the international one as well, by the way. Be it weapon, be it securing our sky, or be it our security guarantees, which will help us not to repeat those kinds of aggressions in future.
So correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Zokwa. So today the position that Ukraine is willing to take is that you're willing to become a neutral state, not aligned with any particular bloc, provided there is enough security guarantee that is provided to you by Russia. Am I correct?
Absolutely. Those two issues are going in one single complex. Only if we are having enough security guarantees from all the major states, from not only our neighbors, from not only Russia, because you cannot now trust Russia. So all our neighbors, all the major international partners, only if we have this complex of security guarantees, we can think about possible status of my country, be it neutral or non-bloc or anything else.
Let's also look at some other aspects, get into some specifics, because you've also spoken extensively about the presidential level talks that perhaps is going to yield some result on the ground. Let me quote what the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov had to say. And he says, President Putin doesn't reject meeting President Zelenskyy. Probably such a necessity will take place, but for this we need to undertake preparatory work on the Belarusian track. As I understand, Mr. Zhukov, you are not very comfortable. Your country is not very comfortable with any talks happening on the soil of Belarus. So how is this going to really work out? What is it that you are planning, and what is it that you are willing to tell the Russians at this stage?
No, the territory doesn't matter for the time. For instance, currently the negotiations are taking place in the video format. Again, today everything is possible. It's not necessarily to meet on this or that territory. You lose time for logistics, for transportation or whatever. So we are absolutely fine with having the video conference on the preparatory stage. Right, you are. The final negotiations, the final agreements will be reached only at the level of heads of governments and states. But in order to have this, and that's what we hear from the Russian side, that's where we can agree that the delegation should still work a little bit more time to reach these negotiations. The only bad thing is Ukraine doesn't have this time because, you know, every minute, every hour, unfortunately, soldiers or civilians are dying in Ukraine because of the air bombardments, because of the artillery working, because of the cruise missiles flying over Ukraine, because they're hitting civilian targets, just like it was the case today in the night when they hit a multi-story building in Kiev, when they hit a plant in Kiev, when they hit some objects in the south of Mykolaiv region. They're bombarding Kharkiv severely. They are encircling the city of Mariupol, which is on the south of Ukraine, namely the Sea of Azov. And the situation is disastrous there. 400,000 people are held hostages, being deprived of water, food, electricity, medicine. And we're asking the international community, and by the way, this is also the subject of negotiations, that please provide a humanitarian corridor from Mariupol. For the practically 2 weeks, they are blocking this humanitarian corridor. So no, they are not letting people out, and even will not let the humanitarian convoys coming into the city of Mariupol, bringing elementary food, water supplies, etc. So this should be also reached first at the negotiations. People should be thought over first, and then comes the next provisions.
I would like to take one more question and then introduce my colleague who's from our sister network. He's going to ask you a question in Hindi, which I'll translate. But before that, let me take one more question with you, Mr. Zhukov. That is, there are two very interesting statements that have been made in the last 48 hours. One that came in from Russian President Vladimir Putin, and I'm quoting this for you. He says, there are certain positive shifts. Negotiators on our side tell me. Then just a day later, your president said that Russia had now adopted a fundamentally different approach in talks to end the war. The signal seems to be positive from both ends. What I want to ask you is that what has really shifted in the last 2 to 3 days, what we are witnessing, and the entire world would like to know now. Are we really looking forward to some sort of a ceasefire agreement? If so, what would be the contour of that ceasefire agreement, and perhaps a stage where the war ends perhaps sometime this week? Is there any timeline that you're looking at?
Well, what significantly changed is that Russians started not only to dictate, not only to make ultimatums, not only to talk, but to listen to Ukrainian position. Ukraine will not surrender. Ukraine will not capitulate. Ukrainian armed forces will fight to the end. So right you are. The immediate result of the negotiation should be a ceasefire. Fortunately, this is not the case. But you are rightfully saying, and you are rightfully quoting both presidents, that the mood is starting to be generally positive, and we put much hope on this. When the negotiations will end, no one can tell you now. Not the direct people who are taking part in the negotiation teams, not other institutions. We are hoping that it will happen as soon as possible. That's a matter of life and death to Ukrainians.
सवाल यही है, क्योंकि नाटो का जिक्र हुआ और सीज फायर का भी जिक्र हुआ है। एक महत्वपूर्ण सवाल यही है कि जितनी भी अभी तक मीटिंग्स हुई हैं, क्या उसमें नाटो को लेकर और सीज फायर को लेकर बातचीत हुई है? पहला ये। दूसरा ये कि लगातार प्रेसिडेंट जेलेंस्की की तरफ से कहा गया कि हम भी शांति चाहते हैं। अगर शांति चाहते हैं तो क्या निगोशिएशन टेबल पर जो बात हुई उस पर सहमति नहीं बनी, और वो नहीं बनी तो क्या कारण रहा उसका?
It's a twofold question, Mr. Zokwa. First is with regards to the role that is going to be played by NATO. A lot has already been spoken about. In your negotiations that have so far taken place with the Russian side, is there any discussion that has taken place, at least till so far, about NATO? And the second question is that your president has been talking about peace, and he's saying that this is a war that has been waged by Russia, but somewhere down the line, this has not really worked out for both sides. So what is going wrong right now in terms of why is it taking so much of time? Of course, negotiations do take its own time, but many would ask you, where is the stumbling block?
Well, answering your first question, NATO is not the main negotiation topic during the negotiations. Again, I just told you earlier that there is a possibility to discuss the non-block status of Ukraine, provided the security guarantees are met. As far as why negotiations are going so long, I don't know. You should better ask Russian negotiators. Why the war is still going on, also you should ask armed forces. Originally, the plan was to capture Ukraine over 3 or 4 days. Now we have 19th day of war, and neither major city has been captured by the Russian armed forces. Yes, they managed to encircle some cities in the southern Ukraine. They managed to encircle Kherson and to infiltrate it with Russian troops. But even in the occupied Kherson, people are coming out on the streets with the protests, carrying Ukrainian flags and singing national anthem. And no one can do anything with these brave and courageous Ukrainians. Yes, they managed to kidnap the mayor of Melitopol, a small city on the southern Ukraine. But that does not mean that the inserted mayor, whom they try to insert, will ever be recognized by Ukrainian population in this city. Yes, they are bombing Kharkiv day by day, very big, large city in the east of Ukraine, but they haven't managed to encircle it, and the people are struggling. Yes, they are trying to encircle Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, by destroying the suburbs. Several small cities around Kiev practically do not exist, and the people and the population is being evacuated. Luckily, because this was not the case the previous days. They would not even let people go out from those cities. Now it's taking place. But again, the idea to encircle and to capture Kiev within the first 3 or 4 days just failed. So that is why they need some symbolic victory to capture some huge city. That's probably that they will gonna do, and that's what probably they need in order to have a stronger position during the negotiations. On our turn, we will fight, and at the same time, we are showing our readiness to speak at the negotiations.
Mr. Zovko, can I then ask you, because you've already touched upon the territories and what's the current status? Russia just a few days ago made this claim that 30% of the Ukrainian territory has already been captured by them. You are perhaps the best person to answer this question for everyone who's watching. 300 million viewers are watching our network. So I want you to tell them, what's the current situation? Has Russia been able to occupy any of your territory?
No, this is not the case. This is fake news. They managed to encircle some cities or to take some, routes under their control, but not in any city or small town which they managed to encircle or to infiltrate by their troops do they able to have their authority. Because if you occupy the city, that means you have your own authority. You have the situation when the population obeys to this authority. Again, this is not the case. So 30% is absolutely nonsense. But yes, they are doing some successful operations in the south and in the east and of Ukraine. But obviously, this is not enough to break the spirits of Ukrainians. And the spirits of Ukrainians is very brave. And even those cities which are temporarily captured, occupied, or encircled, they, Ukrainians, we will fight to the end. We will never recognize any occupation authorities.
Since you're talking about the not recognizing the occupation, what we have also witnessed is that what Russia is demanding. They are demanding that Crimea be recognized as a Russian territory. As far as the Donbas region, Ukraine should be recognizing them as independent, and of course then the neutral status. I want to understand Ukraine's position vis-a-vis Crimea and Donbas region.
The position is very simple. Ukrainian Donbas and Ukrainian Crimea are Ukrainian territories, and we will not give away a single inch of Ukrainian territory.
So you are not willing to recognize Donbas region as an independent region. That still remains the position, and that's non-negotiable, if I understand.
Definitely not.
Mr. Zokwa, my colleague wants to take one question with regards to today's meeting. If Mridul can just come in, and I'll translate that once again for you.
बिल्कुल लगातार जिस तरीके की मीटिंग चल रही है उसको लेकर मेरा एक सवाल है, क्योंकि तरह तरह के आरोप एक तरफ लगाए जा रहे हैं, दूसरी तरफ चाइना और अमेरिका भी एक तरीके से सही जो सुझाव है या सॉल्यूशन की तरफ देख रहा है, उनके बीच में भी लगातार मीटिंग्स हो रही है. यूक्रेन की उसमें क्या भूमिका है और क्या एक विक्टिम की तरह इसे माना जाए, क्या ऐसी भूमिका उन्हें नजर आती है?
Mr. Zokwa, what my colleague was asking you is that we are talking on a day when the US National Security Advisor will be meeting China's top diplomat, that too in Rome. What we would like to know is that has your president spoken to someone in Washington or President Biden with regards to this particular meeting? Because there is this larger fear or larger understanding, if I may say so, Mr. Zokwa, that somewhere down the line this is also appearing to become a proxy war, because these talks that are happening between America and China, do you think that that could be the real solution?
Well, first of all, my president regularly communicates with President Biden, and definitely President Biden has all the latest information about latest development in Ukraine. President Biden knows Ukrainian position, knows position of my president very well. So it's very good that during today's talk, his national security advisor will have this position discussed with high-level Chinese representative. We also, if you ask me whether China and the US can help of bringing peace to Ukraine, yes, that's what they ask from the international community. I told you that any help, any assistance from any high-level foreign leader would be welcome. So they are discussing today Ukraine. Definitely the US side will share the results of today's negotiation with their Ukrainian counterparts. Chief of Staff of President of Ukraine, Mr. Andriy Yermak, is in constant negotiations with his US counterpart, Mr. Sullivan. So yes, we are taking positively today's talk.
We are also talking on a day when Israel has offered to mediate between Russia and Ukraine. A lot of news reports were coming in with regards to the talks that have already taken place between President Zelenskyy and the Prime Minister of Israel. So a lot of claims, counterclaims. The real picture as far as Israel's role is concerned, that's not known, Mr. Zokwa. Why don't you tell our viewers what's the position like? And have you all actually discussed about this mediation, the possibility of a mediation, Israel playing that particular role between Russia and Ukraine?
Yes, my president spoke several times with Prime Minister Bennett of Israel, and the core of these negotiations was, yes, the possible mediation role of Israel. You know that Prime Minister Bennett even met with President Putin during the Shabbat. He paid his visit to Russia, and during this visit and after this visit and before this visit, he was also speaking to President Zelenskyy. Again, Chief of Staff of Mr. President, Mr. Andriy Yermak, is speaking to his counterpart, National Security Advisor in Israel. Yes, it is possible for Ukraine to receive or to positively evaluate the Israeli mediation role. That's what we are doing. That's what we are taking into account. My president even said that he would be ready to meet President Putin in Jerusalem. So Israel is playing a very important role in today's mediation process, and we count on its results.
I'll take one more question from my colleague Mridul.
बिल्कुल एक मेरा सवाल है. इससे पहले मैं एक ज़रूर सवाल करना चाहूँगा क्योंकि लगातार सैंक्शन लगाए जा रहे हैं. क्या जितने भी सैंक्शन अभी तक रशिया पर लगाए गए हैं वो बहुत हद तक क्या कोई भूमिका निभा सकते हैं युद्ध रोकने में? यूक्रेन को क्या लगता है उस पर?
A lot has already been spoken, Mr. Zokwa, of the kind of sanctions that have been levied on Russia. Do you really see some sort of a benefit of it, or you feel that not enough has been done as far as those sanctions that have been levied against Russia? Or more needs to be done?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely sanctions do matter, and we are satisfied that those long-lasting sanctions which my president demands, and I would like to remind you that before the war started, my president was talking about preventive sanctions vis-a-vis Russia, preventive sanctions which could have stopped war of Russia against Ukraine. Unfortunately, he was not heard by that time, nor by our US counterparts, nor by our European Union counterparts. And the war has started. So now, only now, the international community started to introduce sanctions. Some sanctions are quite strong, as some US or Great Britain sanctions. But if we're talking about the European Union sanctions, they are still lagging behind. So yes, they introduced partially the personal sanctions, for instance, against some oligarchs or high-level representatives. But if you are talking about serious impact of sanctions, serious immediate impact of sanctions, this is what is still lacking. So we ask our European Union counterparts to introduce serious sanctions of SWIFT cutoff, for instance, because they only cut it off 7 banks, which are not the major banks. The major banks are still left without cutoff from SWIFT. Or if we are talking about serious economic things, just think about embargo of Russian imports of oil, gas, and coal. This should be very important. That's what US is starting to introduce, but unfortunately we lack the same courage from the European Union. Or closing the European ports for all the Russian vessels. That will be also very important. Or talking about freezing of Russian accounts in the European banks and, confiscating these accounts and assets. By the way, since we are talking with you, I would also urge India to start thinking about introducing some possible sanctions. You should not stay, away and not paying attention to the situation in my country. I do understand the relations which India has with Russia, but it's high time for your country, for your leadership also to think about possible sanctions vis-a-vis Russia. My president has a very good dialogue with Prime Minister Modi. They met in person in the end of last year. So we would appreciate if India would join sanction regime. We would appreciate if at the General Assembly in the UN, India would support resolutions which are about Russian aggression. So please, it's also high time for all the international community to pay a serious attention to Ukraine and to make serious efforts.
Since you are already talking about the international community, and I would like to get into some specifics about it. Before the invasion began, we remember the dialogue that was taking place between Ukraine and Germany and Russia. The German Chancellor was here in Ukraine and then he flew to Russia. But things have rapidly changed thereafter, Mr. Zokwa. That is the role of Germany at this point in time. And very strong statements have been made by Ukraine vis-a-vis Germany. How do you look at this dithering position, or many would say the dilly-dallying of certain European nations when it comes to a direct support to Ukraine?
Well, Germany pays its attention and makes some efforts to support Ukraine vis-a-vis Russian aggression. My president is in constant phone negotiations with Chancellor Scholz. But yes, if you ask me about the role of Germany, the role of Germany is very important in the EU, for instance. So when my president talks to German representatives, or we on our level talk with our German counterparts, we ask Germans, since they are a locomotive of European Union, to be more strong, more serious, more brave, probably, in the sanctions which we talked about. Or, for instance, if we are talking about no-fly zone over Ukraine, and knowing the position of Germany, which is quite crucial in the NATO, we also ask Germany to be more brave in this regard. If NATO is not able to close the sky over Ukraine, let's help Ukraine with our potential. Let's help Ukraine with the anti-air defense system, so anti-missile defense system, or with fighter jets, which Ukraine badly needs now to have the dominancy in the sky, because we're doing quite well on the ground. But if to take the aerial situation, we still need some more equipment, some more fights, some more air defense system. So we urge all our European partners, not only Germany, but France and other EU members, as well as the US, to pay attention to this component of defense. Sky is what matters for the life and death of Ukrainians.
In fact, Mr. Zokwa, I would like to take the opportunity to tell you that we are one of the few global networks over the last few days. Of the 21 cities, at least we have been to 18 where we have seen large-scale destruction that's actually taking place. And we have spoken to a lot of local Ukrainians. And what we can tell all our viewers is that the spirit of the Ukrainians, that cannot be defeated. It doesn't look like. And the fact of the matter is that almost every civilian here on the road, they're fighting, they're trying to defend the country. But being a part of the Zelenskyy administration, do you believe that somewhere down the line you're hedging your bets a little too much on the West, and perhaps it's the innocent Ukrainians who are losing their life, because what many would see that that the West is firing from the shoulders of Ukraine, and this is actually not just about Ukraine but more about Russia and America?
Well, thank you. First of all, let me thank you for your important job you are doing. You are fixing what is going on in Ukraine. This humanitarian component is very important because, after we will win, definitely Russia will be brought to justice in several international institutions, be it in International Criminal Court or be in ICC, and we already started the process. Very important that you are fixing what is going on in Ukraine, that you are fixing those atrocities which taken place in Ukraine. I mean, unfortunately, every day we have this or that barbaric act of Russian armed forces, be it the airstrikes on the maternity hospital in Mariupol, like it was the case several days ago, and 2 women already died because of these airstrikes, and 1 small child, a baby. Or be it the airstrikes and bombardments of cities of practically every city in north and east and southern Ukraine. Some cities are practically wiped out from the ground, like the city of Volnovakha in eastern Ukraine. Or the city of Mariupol, we talked about already, when people are dying of dehydration, people are starving and will not be let out. You're rightfully saying the international community should not think about geopolitical wars or possibilities of speculating about possibilities of starting the world in Europe or Third World War. The war in Europe has already started. It is taking place in Ukraine, unfortunately. We are fighting, we are struggling, and we will fight to the last drop of our blood. But again, we want international community not to think, theoretically, what will happen if, again, the worst case scenario is already happening. The atrocities are already happening. The genocide of Ukrainian people is already happening. It very much resembles what was taking place during the Second World War, when Nazis were having the genocide against Ukrainians. When you are bombarding only the civilian objects, it's nothing but genocide against Ukrainian people. So we would like the US, the European Union, India as well, think about this, and not only think, but act.
Mr. Zokwa, permit us to take a few more questions, because on a day like this, it becomes very important that the world hears from the man who has been advising President Zelenskyy as far as his diplomacy is concerned. And more importantly, there is a lot of information warfare that's taking place, and it's important that the truth really comes out. I'll just take a few more questions. Mr. Zokwa, Mridul wants to ask you one more question.
बिल्कुल, मेरा सवाल बायो वेपन और न्यूक्लियर वॉर की तरफ है, क्योंकि तरह तरह के आरोप लगते रहे हैं। देश जो यूक्रेन की तरफ देखते हैं पूरे विश्व के, वो तरह तरह के कभी आरोप भी लगाते हैं और सच्चाई भी जानना चाहते हैं। पहला मेरा सवाल यही है, क्या जिस तरीके के आरोप लग रहे हैं उस पर यूक्रेन की सफाई क्या है? और दूसरा ये कि एक तरीके का खतरा भी है बायो वेपन का या न्यूक्लियर थ्रेट का, उसको लेकर क्या निगोशिएशन टेबल पर कभी बात हुई है? क्या उसका भी जिक्र हुआ है?
In fact, what Mridul was asking, Mr. Zokwa, is a charge, an allegation that has been leveled against Ukraine. And perhaps it's important that Ukraine comes out clean as far as this allegation is concerned, because it matters a lot. I'd like to put out some details for you. Chinese Foreign Ministry has basically claimed that US has 26 biological laboratories in Ukraine. Russia has claimed that there are about 30 laboratories in Lviv, Kharkiv and Poltava, and that they are working with some dangerous infectious agents. The matter has reached the United Nations Security Council. Many are asking, is America funding bioweapon research on your soil? And there is a massive global controversy. Would you like to talk a little bit about this?
Well, I would say clearly that this is absolutely a false Russian narrative. Ukraine is a huge country, also in terms of science. So definitely we have scientific institutions in Ukraine, including the cities you are mentioning. But never ever Ukraine was thinking or sponsoring on having the sponsorship of any kind of biological or chemical weapon being designed, produced or used. So this is the absolutely clear position of my state. My president reiterated it several times. But vice versa, when Russia is speculating on these topics, that means that unfortunately Russians are ready to use biological or chemical weapon against Ukrainian population. For instance, we have the information that if they are not successful in capturing Kiev or some other big cities, they might try to use the biological or chemical weapon. Again, that's where the international community should pay attention to. So I would urge China to think about this potential threat, as well as other countries to pay many more attention to this potential threat of Russia being using the biological and chemical weapon against Ukraine.
But why do you think, Mr. Zokwa, that China at this point in time would suddenly make such comments about Ukraine? And let's also not forget about what's really happening. This rather the proximity between Russia and China, the help that Russia is asking from China. What do you think is really happening?
Well, we also heard these news, and then later, immediately, those news about Russia asking help from China were, rebuffed by Chinese officials. I would not like to speculate about Russian-Chinese relations. Probably you would better ask the Chinese officials about the level of their relations. We would like to remind to China that they are members of the United Nations Security Council, and they bear responsibility together with P5 countries on the level of international security in the world. So China should understand that really it's a great power, it's a big state, and it has a huge, amount of responsibility over what is going on in the world.
Mr. Zokwa, a lot has been speculated or spoken about what's going to happen as far as Kiev is concerned, an imminent siege of Kiev. The two axes perhaps that is being used by the Russians are the northwest and the northeastern side. There hasn't been any offensive over the last few hours, but what's the assessment that Ukraine is making? Do you all really believe that there could be a blitzkrieg attack on Kiev very soon? At least that's what the Russians are planning, and perhaps the world needs to act soon before there could be massive bombardment in the capital city of Ukraine. What's the assessment on the Ukrainian side as far as Kiev is concerned?
Well, the mere word blitzkrieg means that it has to be quick. They really wanted to have a blitzkrieg over Kiev within the 3 or 4 days of the war. Now it's the 19th day of war, and nothing is even close to blitzkrieg around Kiev. They try to encircle, they try to block the city, to cut off from the all the possible roads and connections. But with the potential, with the quantity of armed forces which they have around Kiev, it's absolutely impossible, because Kiev is defended by Ukrainian armed forces. If you ask me whether they are potentially able to swipe off Kiev away, to make a carpet bombardments of Kiev, yes, it's possible. But in order to have this, we have to have many more quantity of armed forces, not the amount that they have, but several times more. And in order to capture this city, you have to kill all the Ukrainians, all the armed forces which are situated in Kiev. Currently, there are more than 2 million people in Kiev. So if they will kill all the Ukrainians which are in Kiev, yes, they will capture the city. If they will make the carpet bombardments or severe missile attacks, yeah, they can ruin every civilian building in Kiev. And then what? What for do they need to do this? I think this question is rhetoric.
Well, it was a pleasure speaking to you, Mr. Zokwa. I would like to end this interview by asking you, how do you see all of this ending? Because at the end of the day, everyone wants to know that will peace be given a chance? And if these negotiations really fail, then what is it that Ukraine would like to offer?
First of all, Ukraine will definitely win. Secondly, diplomacy should be given a chance and is given a chance. Thirdly, unfortunately, we do not know, and no one knows now when it will happen. But we all are staying optimists. My president is optimist. My president is giving his personal example, not only to the Ukrainian people, but all to the people in the world. He's now, I think, the strongest and the most popular politician in the world. So be with us, help us, and believe in our victory.
Well, Mr. Zokwa, thank you very much. We'd also like to make an appeal through you, Mr. Zokwa. There are millions and millions watching us and our coverage. We are really hoping that your president will address the South Asians through our network, because there are a lot of people, a lot of fellow countrymen who are standing with you. So we are really hoping that you will pass on the message to President Zelenskyy that he should take the opportunity to speak to the South Asian diaspora through Republic Media Network. That's a request that we are sending across to you through our network.
Okay, I will reiterate this message. You have to understand that it's hard for him to give exclusive interviews. Obviously, he is fighting the war and he is the head of the armed forces. He usually regularly gives the general press conferences, but, well, your request is taken, and I will urge the press service to be in touch with you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zokwa. Stay safe. And as we say that today the world needs to stand united, stand for the Ukrainians. Thank you very much for speaking to Republic Media Network.
Thank you.
Many thanks for your efforts. Stay in touch.
That was the deputy head of President Zelenskyy's office, someone who's considered to be a part of the core team heading the foreign policy division, advising the president as far as diplomacy is concerned. But as you've already heard from the man in question, pointing out that it is high time that diplomacy should be given a chance.